Okay, so back to this. Here's our little pathogen. Here's its little antigen. Here's its little antigen. What I'm showing you here is after the immune response has happened, our B cells make these little chemicals called antibodies. Yeah, we've all heard of antibodies, but when we've heard of antibodies, we've heard about the antibodies in the blood that are there for blood types. Even though they're similar chemicals, that's really quite different than this. Your B cells or B lymphocytes, the way that they fight the pathogen is B cells fight the pathogen by releasing antibodies. And a generic antibody always looks like this. It looks like a Y, and then it's got two sticks on its arm right here. We're going to talk about this tomorrow as well. So you see this is the antibody here, a little Y down there. Here's an antibody here, and here's another one here. So you can see that they kind of resemble a Y. Antibodies are made to attach to whatever antigen they're supposed to go out and get. Okay? They attach at this one little region, which we'll talk about later. Don't need to name it or anything for right now. But then you'll see the rest of the pathogen would be attached to it when it goes out and links up with it. So when we're talking about active and passive immunity, what you're going to actually see is we refer to this in whether the immune response is actually making antibodies. If we are making antibodies, we call that active immunity. If you are making the antibodies, we call it active immunity. What cells make the antibodies? Very good, B cells. Yes, tomorrow as we get more in depth, I will change that. But it is a subset of B cells. B cells actually, when they get activated and divide, they call them plasma cells, and plasma cells make the antibodies. The point is, they still come from your B cell type of immunity. Any pathogen that's harmful to our body, that our B cells would in turn make antibodies against, we could say that we have active immunity taking place. If our bodies are stimulated at all to make the antibodies, that is active immunity. And there's many situations that cause that, and we'll talk about them in a second. We also have a type of immunity that's called passive immunity. Okay, if active is when you're making antibodies, what would passive be? You're not making them. You are receiving them from another source. This is when you receive antibodies from another source. That's a little different. Because of the name, it would sound like that's it, but it's really not. Okay, now here's the fun part, guys. Let's separate active and passive right down the middle. There are two types of each. There's a natural version of each, and then there's an artificial. Let's do the natural first. The natural way of things means not medical. Okay, every time you see natural, it means not medical. It means through a normal life, not involving medicine, what would occur. So for active immunity to be natural, that is the most basic, the most simple thing that there is on the planet. You come to class, your neighbor sneezes on you, the pathogen gets inside of you, your body makes antibodies to fight that. The active part is you making the antibodies. The natural part is due to a normal exposure. And you can see that right there. Making antibodies due to a normal exposure is called natural active immunity, or you could say active natural. I usually say natural active. Well, that makes sense. You go to Taco Villa in the 1980s. You eat a burrito that has lettuce on it. that lettuce was cut on a cutting board that had chicken on it. The other one, the Shigella, got in it. And everyone in Odessa that ate there that day got shigellosis. Massive vomiting and diarrhea and other pleasantries that we won't talk about. That was natural active immunity at its best. Normal exposure, going to eat somewhere. Harmful stuff, pathogens were in the food that you ate. Your body responds to that. Part of the response isn't what we would necessarily like, but it's trying to help you. On a cellular level, what was going on? Your B cells in your body would have been making antibodies and dumping them into the body fluids to try to fight that. And that would be a natural active type of immunity. Artificial active is very common nowadays. Most people have this taking place in their bodies. Remember, artificial is always due to medical conditions, interference, activation, however you want to look at that. The artificial way to activate your immune system and cause your B cells to make antibodies would be to inject that foreign invader into your body to stimulate your immune system to fight it, to cause your B cells to make antibodies. We call that a vaccination. See, when they vaccinate, they try to make the pathogen harmless. They say they attenuate it. They either kill it or they make it to where it can't cause you to get the disease. But pretty much most people now know that sometimes that doesn't work, and people get a vaccination for the flu. Quite frequently get the flu. Okay? Sometimes they get the same strain. Sometimes they get different ones. They work, but sometimes they don't work as well as they're supposed to. Okay? That is active artificial. Natural, normal exposure, you make it. Artificial, medical exposure, you make it. What's the it that you make? Antibodies. And these antibodies go out through your bodily fluids, and they would attach to the antigens and neutralize them. And we'll talk about more how that works tomorrow night. Passive immunity. The antibodies are received from an outside source, another source. The natural way to get them would be to get them from your mother. There are two separate conditions that cause you to get your antibodies from your mom. Number one is just when you're growing inside of her. Her antibodies, you're in that nice, warm, comfortable, fluid environment, floating along, and antibodies can cross the placental barrier. The smallest antibodies can do that. We'll name them tomorrow night. That's a natural, passive way to get your immunity. Doesn't last very long, lasts for a few months. Because once you're outside of mom, her antibodies aren't coming through you that way anymore. Then you're outside of mom and you get hungry and you got to eat. And the natural way to feed a baby is for the baby to breastfeed. So, pretty cool that there are antibodies in mother's milk, in breast milk. Baby drinks breast milk, baby gets antibodies from mom that way, as long as the baby is breastfeeding. So if you got a kid that breastfeeds till he's 2, he's getting an immune system till he's 2. As soon as you take him off the breast and put him on the bottle, no longer getting antibodies from mom. Okay? But you're not getting bit either, right? Yep. So notice, both natural passive types you receive from mom. Sometimes when you're inside of mom, sometimes after birth. This is one of the advantages of breastfeeding to the baby, is it helps to keep the baby's immune system stronger. Okay? Because at this point in time, the baby's immune system is developing in early stages. So they've shown, sometimes they show that babies that get breastfed can be healthier than babies that are not. Okay, what would be artificial? Artificial would be when the antibodies are injected into a person. That's different than a vaccination. In a vaccination, you inject the bad guy or the antigen, the part of the bad guy, and the body still produces a response. With an antibody injection, what happened is they probably injected a horse, and the horse went through the immune process and produced the antibodies, and then they pulled the antibodies from the serum, from the plasma of the horse. They took them, and now they'll inject them into people. Horses, of course. Yeah, you know. They do that. They use horses. They can use other animals for that. And now they can even grow antibodies in labs. They can fuse tumor cells with B cells and do all kinds of cool stuff and grow those antibodies in labs outside of living animals and do that. This would be like a gamma globulin shot. A gamma globulin shot would be an example of artificial passive immunity. So it's going to take a little time to get those straight. I always ask about differences between natural, artificial versions of both active and passive. You're going to have to identify what goes where. So just make sure you learn all 4 of those.